The two most frequently asked questions that I see on photography forums, related Reddit threads, and even my own comments are 1. Which camera is the best camera to get when you're just starting out? And 2. Should I start off with Canon or Sony? Today we're going to answer that question. Let's get undone. Gerald Undone. He's crazy. What is happening, everybody? I'm Gerald Undone, and today we're going to look at two beginner entry-level models from Canon and Sony. Now, one thing that I want to get across right away is that there is no perfect camera. I'm going to do my best in this video to highlight the things that I think are important in 2018 to make your decision much, much easier, but I can't make it for you, and sometimes there's no clear winner. So let's get into the contestants and why I chose them. From Canon, we've got the EOS 200D, also known as the Rebel SL2, and from Sony, we've got the A6000. Quick note, these models were provided to me by Camera Canada, Canada's.com for cameras, which some of you know that I've been working on a collaboration with them lately. So I'm going to include links to their site and the products that I'm talking about in the description below because they were kind enough to let me monkey around with these cameras. If you're Canadian and you like camera gear, I highly recommend you check them out, but for my international viewers, I'll also include links to Amazon as well. But I want to encourage all my viewers, Canadian or not, to check out Camera Canada's social media pages, which will also be in the description. 1, because you'll be supporting a great business, and 2, because I'm going to be posting some exclusive content there in the coming weeks. Now, I chose the SL2 from Canon because of its size, its updated features, and its price point. It boasts the latest processor from Canon and also has the famous dual pixel autofocus. The A6000 from Sony, on the other hand, is a little bit older. It came out in 2014, but it still remains the entry-level Sony camera at the same price point as the SL2, with both of these systems being around $500 to $600 US or $600 to $700 Canadian for the lens kits. Now, since this video is about cameras for beginners, yes, there are some models that come in a little bit lower than this, like the Rebel T6i, also known as the EOS 750D, which is quite capable, but it does lack some of the features and the new chip and the new autofocus system, but you might be able to get a bit of a bargain as they start to dwindle down. There's also the non-eye versions of these cameras, like the T6 and the T7, they're just missing the eye, but I fear that you're giving up too much for the savings in these models. Often they have significantly reduced tech, which probably won't serve that well for learning what to expect in cameras 2018 and beyond. So with that in mind, I've decided that the starting point for recommendations for the Canon lineup is the Rebel SL2, aka the EOS 200D. Now, of course, there are other brands that have offerings in this category. You've got Nikon with the D3400, which is quite a capable DSLR. On the mirrorless space, you've got Fuji, Olympus, and Panasonic that all have models that are pretty competitive in that entry level. But this video was geared to answer the famous question of Canon or Sony. Now, the first thing you need to ask yourself when you're looking to purchase a new camera is the same thing you would ask yourself if you're going to go tool shopping, which is, what am I going to be using it for? Because if you don't get the right tool for the job, you're going to be in for a world of frustration. So let's get into those questions now while we unbox the kits and talk a little bit about the specs. Now, both of these recommendations are for kits rather than buying the body only and then buying lenses separately. Now, there's two key reasons for this. The first is that it's much more affordable. And the second is that a true beginner wouldn't have really developed a focal length preference yet or developed a shooting style yet, so they don't really know which focal lengths they like or need. So it doesn't really make a lot of sense to go in and buy a lot of high quality glass when you don't really know what glass to get. Using kit lenses is a great way to learn how you like to shoot without overcommitting on lenses, because in the end, lenses are often the biggest obstacle to making camera decisions that are best for you because of overinvestment too early on glass. This also helps to avoid a common mistake I see beginners make, which is to invest on a series of low-end lenses which aren't going to hold their value well and don't really provide much of a pathway for improved image quality. Start with a kit, figure out what you need, then buy premium, specifically targeted lenses once you know what you need. Now, the lenses that come with these kits are nothing spectacular, but they will give you a sense of the more common focal lengths in that 24 to 70 millimeter range. That's because you have to consider the crop factor of these cameras. The Rebel SL2 has a crop factor of 1.6. Now, what this means is, unlike full frame cameras which have a 1-to-1 ratio with the advertised focal length, the focal lengths are going to be multiplied by 1.6, because rather than getting the full sort of frame readout, you're getting the inner 1.6 times sort of zoom of that frame. So on the 18 to 55 that comes with the SL2, you're going to be getting an equivalent of 29 to 88 millimeters. And in the case of the Sony A6000, which has a 1.5 times crop, the kit lens will have an equivalency of 24 to 75 millimeters. The Sony lens is also a little bit faster with a maximum aperture of 3.5 versus the Canon's f4. That's how big the opening of the lens gets to let light in. The smaller the f number, the larger the opening, the more light that will get in and the brighter your image will be. As I was saying earlier, we need to evaluate these cameras based on the usage situations they will satisfy. So let's talk a little bit about portability. The Canon is clearly larger, and it's also about 30% heavier at just about 1 pound. But it does allow for a longer battery life with a rating of about 650 shots versus the Sony's 360 shots. Yet the Sony's batteries are slightly more expensive as well. Aside from that, both bodies have equally sized sensors and screens. They both contain internal flashes as well as hot shoes, although the built-in flash on the Canon is slightly more powerful. And they both have built-in Wi-Fi, but only the Canon has Bluetooth. Both have viewfinders, but the Canon's is optical and the Sony's is electronic, but we'll get into that in a moment. Now, speaking of the screens, let's get into one of the major usage differences between the two cameras: shooting in front of the camera or from behind. The screen on the Canon is completely articulating, giving you the ability to see yourself. The Sony's, however, merely flips up a little. Being able to frame your shot from in front of the camera and attach a run-and-gun style mic to the top should make this an easy decision if you're looking to vlog in this way. Now, you could convert the Sony to have these capabilities by adding a monitor or some audio connections, but that would inflate the budget, which would break this comparison. Plus, it would make the camera a little bit more flimsy, which wouldn't really be conducive to that active style of shooting. Sticking with this style of shooting, it's also in this mode that the Canon shines, with the SL2's inclusion of Canon's dual pixel autofocus system, which is likely the best in the business, and you can engage it using the touch panel on the back of the camera. The Sony's panel, on the other hand, does not have a touch screen. This encourages you to use the live view mode on the Canon rather than the optical viewfinder, which will further improve your autofocus reliability in those vlogging situations. The Sony, however, really starts to edge out the Canon when you get behind the camera, with its inclusion of the 179-point autofocus system, 11 frames per second drive mode for excellent tracking and action photography. The AF system on the Canon, however, is only 9 points, and it's really not that capable when it comes to tracking movement or photographing sports. Also, the viewfinders are different. Like I was saying earlier, the Canon uses an optical viewfinder, which essentially just reflects the image through the lens up into your eye using a pentaprism, which basically lets you see identical conditions that your eye would, but it's framed like a camera. An electronic viewfinder, however, is more like a video being projected into your eye. These cameras have no mirrors to bounce the lens, hence the name mirrorless, so basically they're generating a video preview inside the viewfinder. The advantage of the electronic viewfinder is that it shows you an image how it will be captured after accounting for all of your exposure settings. I think from a learning perspective, this has some advantages because it saves you time instead of having to take an image and then review it, take an image and review it while you learn what your exposure settings do and how much adjustments that you're making. Purists out there, though, I think will likely suggest that the optical viewfinder, which is much, much closer to the film days, will give you the harder learned lessons of having to get your exposure right, because in the film days, if you got your exposure wrong, you're going to be wasting film and potentially ruin a shoot. So learning through the optical viewfinder is learning the hard way, and your lessons will be, I guess, more ingrained. But it's 2018, and I say if you can learn faster with an electronic viewfinder with fewer wasted steps, go for it. Be warned though, electronic viewfinders consume more battery than the LCD screen, and obviously vastly more battery than an optical viewfinder would. In terms of actual quality in photo and video, both cameras have very similar specs, but produce images that have different aesthetics. This one I can't really help you with, as it's completely up to you. Some people love Sony's look, other people vastly prefer the skin tones in Canon. I can say though that if you plan on heavily editing your images, this is significantly less important because both cameras are capable of shooting in RAW. Both sensors are 24 megapixels and offer the same low light range of 100 to 25,600 ISO. The Canon sensor is newer though and offers a slightly better dynamic range, but some tests have shown that the Sony has a little bit less noise in low light conditions. To help you decide which aesthetic you prefer, here are 3 images shot on both the Sony and the Canon to help you get a better sense of which rendering you think looks better. For video, both can handle 60 frames per second at 1080p. The Sony, however, due to its compact size, does have some issues with overheating in warmer environments or when doing prolonged video recording. This again adds the argument that the Canon is probably better for a more beat-em-up video style, where the Sony does better in more controlled situations. This is why you'll still see lower-tiered Sonys being used in some professional work once they add a monitor and an audio interface, but vloggers, on the other hand, still stick with Canon despite their recent lack of innovation and video horsepower. In terms of ergonomics, I personally prefer the Canon and its menu system, system. As well, I like the grip a little bit better because I have larger hands. This Sony was released during Sony's era of its less than stellar menu system, which had many complaints for its length and complexity. And in that, there really isn't much to learn because the newer Sony models have a new revised menu system. So not everything that you learn from the Sony menu system is actually going to be that useful if you plan on upgrading to further newer Sonys down the line. And that's the last point I want to address in this video, which is choosing which system to move forward with. It's important to ask yourself if you think you're going to want to stay with Canon and possibly specifically with DSLRs, or if you think you might prefer mirrorless in the long run. Although there have been some DSLRs that have been released to some success lately, all signs do still point to a permanent shift towards the mirrorless market. And in that space, the Sony is definitely king due to its early adoption and innovation. And as I was saying earlier, since lenses are likely going to be your biggest investment if you move past the beginner phase and into the professional or high-level enthusiast, you really need to think about where you want to end up with these systems. Because both of these cameras are capable of mounting some serious glass that you would not want to have to adapt to another system if you change your mind down the road. For instance, in terms of lenses, let's say that you bought the Sony Zeiss 35mm f1.4 Distagon for a couple grand and you loved it on your a6000. Then one day you decide to buy a new full-frame camera from Sony like the a7 III. You could take that lens to even greater heights by popping it on your new camera, but if you decided instead to switch over to Canon, you'd either have to sell that lens at a loss or adapt it to Canon, which would significantly hamper its performance. Now the same thing is true from Canon going to Sony, but the one thing that you should be aware of is that Canon lenses tend to be quite a bit cheaper than Sony lenses, or rather they seem to be perpetually on sale, where the Sony lenses seem to be pretty close to their full price most of the time. So in the long run, your Sony lens lineup will cost more than your Canon lens lineup, so it would be more of a shame to have to switch your Sony lenses back to Canon. So the bottom line here is, if you think you're going to want to be Sony mirrorless in the future, start Sony mirrorless now. If you're not sure, choose whichever camera you think satisfies your usage needs as they are right now, but don't go heavy in on lenses until you know who you are as a photographer. That's going to be it for me. I hope you found this video helpful or at least entertaining, and if you did, make sure you leave it the old thumbs up and consider subscribing if you haven't already. But if you did not find this video helpful or entertaining, feel free to hit the dislike button twice. All right! I'm done.